Welcome back to our next series in our A&E podcasts. We've had a number of previous podcasts on R&D and the ERC credit. And today we're going to talk with my partner, Ron Wainwright, about the infrastructure bill. I'm your host, Scott Duda. I'm an audit partner with Bekaert. I lead our professional services practice group, and looking forward to discussing this new bill. Ron, can you give us your background and the importance of the infrastructure bill?
Thanks, Scott. So my name is Ron Wainwright. I'm a tax partner in our strategic tax advisory group, specifically part of the cash recovery services team. And as Scott highlighted, we'll be digging in and really looking at what you need to be considering now in regards to the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act. And then we'll also talk about budget reconciliation in the context of our podcast today. So thank you for joining. So let's get started. So Scott, what could be the impact of the infrastructure bill to the A&E industry?
Yeah, so it's a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, so significant impact. And, you know, when you say architects and engineers, that's a very broad spectrum. A lot of people doing a lot of different things, but this bill has something for everybody. $40 billion for bridge repairs, $16 billion for major road projects. It's the largest investment in bridges since the interstate highway system was approved in 1956. When you think about that, that was a game changer for our infrastructure, and this is another of those. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Transit rail is going to be modernized. This is the largest federal investment in public transit history since the Amtrak was created. Thousands of miles of transmission lines for our power infrastructure. Removing the lead in the service lines and pipes to provide folks with clean drinking water. There are firms that are doing all of these things, and they may not be doing all of them, but they are doing some of them. And so it's going to impact everybody. Airports are going to be modernized. There's also, as part of the bill, $50 billion to add resilience to our water infrastructure. Things like being able to offset climate change, being prepared for cyber attacks and extreme weather conditions, which we've just seen here in the southeastern portion of the United States. So again, lots of firms doing lots of different things, maybe not all of them, but there's something in here for everyone. Now, it's not a final bill at this point. So, Ron, what's the likelihood that this passes at all and then passes as we see it now? And what's that timeline look like?
So it's an excellent question. As Scott highlighted, it is a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. It includes $550 billion in new infrastructure spending to cap out at that $1 trillion. I think it's always important to kind of answer the question as to, well, where are we in the timeline and what should we expect? So the Senate on August 10th ultimately passed in a bipartisanship way. We saw 17 senators cross the aisle to the Democratic side to pass the infrastructure bill. And then it was moved into the House of Representatives. Very quickly after that August 10th date on the Senate side, they also passed on August 11th the $3.5 trillion budget resolution framework. And I'll comment as to why that's important. So ultimately, the Senate and the House went into recess in the mid-August timetable. And then ultimately, the House returned under Speaker Pelosi on August 23rd to start work on its own budget resolution and also to make preparations to vote on the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Ultimately, the House passed its what's called concurrent budget resolution on the 24th of August. But they did do one thing that was very interesting. The House approved the $3.5 trillion budget plan framework with a stipulation with respect to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which was to be brought and is to be brought by September 27th. So when you think about the timeline, we're at September 8th. We should expect the House to pass the infrastructure bill in a bipartisanship way. No representatives and or senators have pushed back, other than that stipulation that the House has tied it ultimately to the budget plan. I can tell you that committees are hard at work in each chamber currently, which are starting to draft the actual bill text with respect to the budget resolution. The Senate is reportedly slated to reconvene on the 13th of September, and the House later in the week on September 20th, when you think about the budget resolution. And that's very important when you think about the timeline. As we're sitting here at September 8th, we know September 13th and September 15th are dates that have been identified on both of the infrastructure and the resolution bill. It is expected that the infrastructure bill will pass. We know that there's much discussion that's occurring in regards to budget resolution. Senator Manchin came out in an op-ed that indicated that $3.5 trillion was too much on the budget side and might be in the $1.5 to $2 trillion. But I think to answer your question, I think both bills will ultimately pass before Thanksgiving, and they're expected to be on the president's desk really just before the end of 2021, and would become effective January 1, 2022. But as to today's topic on the infrastructure bill, of the 2,702 pages, it's pretty hardened, as they say. So a lot there to digest. So, Scott, what are you seeing within our A&E practice that our clients and firms are focusing on specific to the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, so you mentioned it. The bill has hardened. It's starting to solidify. We see what it's going to look like. As that has happened throughout the summer, a couple of things. The first, and we've talked about it on other podcasts, previous podcasts, but in this pandemic world that we're living in, there's a war for talent right now. A lot of people are making decisions to change jobs, move firms. And so throughout this summer, there's been a lot of aggressive recruiting going on, making sure that people have the right people in place, looking at firms that they may be able to acquire that will give them a skill set that maybe they don't have. When I ran through all of those different portions of the bill, if there's something in there that they want to do but don't have the existing ability, they're looking at acquisitions. They're looking at talent acquisitions, whether it's just recruiting a single person or looking at acquiring a larger practice. So those are a couple of things. And then the last thing is really making sure that they have the capital in place to fund all of this work. Whether that's the labor or whether that's materials, you name it, but making sure that their lines of credit, that whatever debt they may be carrying, that they've got enough capacity on that to have an opportunity to go after some of these projects that are going to be available to them. So that's really where I've seen a lot of the A&E firms, their priorities right now this summer as they're positioning themselves and getting ready for this. It's about talent, it's about the ability to perform, and then it's about having the capital to fund that as you go into that. So Ron, within the reconciliation bill, the tax bill that you mentioned, what are some of the things that our A&E firms should be planning for?
Well, I would say everyone's very attentive right now, and we know that rates, being income tax rates, will increase. So the first thing that our A&E firms need to be focused on is prior to January 1 of 22, What can we do to make sure that we're maximizing our deductions in 2022, not 2021, but also pulling income forward into the 21 year. So rate arbitrage, a lot of planning in that aspect, specifically about accelerating income, deferring deductions where they're worth more in 2022. We know that very similar, the C corporation rates will go from the current 21% to 28%. And if you're in a pass-through entity scenario, we know that it will move from 37 upwards to about 45% if you're in that pass-through. The two key areas that I would say A&E firms need to be very focused on is we know in 2019 that 179 Cap D, an energy provision, was made permanent in the law, which means that if you do a lot of work in the governmental space, which you are about to do from an infrastructure standpoint, you're able to receive a transfer of an energy efficiency deduction at $1.80 gross square foot. And we know in a prior podcast, we identified a A&E firm that we assisted with that meant about $10 million of additional phantom deductions for them to minimize their tax liability. The interesting thing is when we see the budget resolution, that $1.80 is scheduled to go to $3 a square foot. And so when we look at infrastructure and we look over the horizon, maximize 179 Cap D, and begin to plan now to go ahead and align to that $3 a square foot for government projects, as Scott correctly said, really across all of the $1 trillion. The second area is the multi-housing credit. When you think about infrastructure and the concept of building back better, as it's said, there's a multi-residential credit, apartment complexes. A lot of A&E firms do a lot of work in the multi-residential area, commercial, et cetera. But that's a $2,000 credit per unit. And it is scheduled to be made permanent post 12/31/21. So given the focus of housing in the budget, as well as the infrastructure bill, those are two key areas to really pay attention to. So that would be the focus. Scott, let me kind of throw it back to you for conclusions.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to me as a non-tax person. I'm around it enough to know that when the tax law changed several years ago, we felt like that was sort of a maybe once in a career type experience. And it seems like we've got the same type of impact here. A lot of things to think about, a lot of things to take into consideration, and a lot of opportunity. So thanks, Ron, for sharing that information and insight with us. For those of you listening, I want to thank you for joining us. As always, we stand ready to be your guide forward as we navigate the impact of this infrastructure bill. You can reach out to Ron or myself using the contact information included either in the email or on the web where you access the podcast. And the last thing I'll leave you with is just a reminder, as this bill becomes law and we have a time to digest it and fully embrace all of the changes and opportunities that are coming through this bill, we will have a follow-up webinar. As Ron mentioned, the timing of this, we expect to sort of flow through September. And so come October, we'll have a deeper dive. Rather than a podcast, we'll have a webinar on the topic of the infrastructure bill. So please be sure to join us for that. And if you'd like a reminder for that, please be sure to join on our mailing list so that you get reminders on those as well. And thank you again for your time today.